Hello, everybody. Scott Brion here. I have Mike Piekarski and Keith Wood with me, and today we are going to be discussing cybersecurity topics that are relevant to our customer base and business community at large. Mike posed a question at the beginning of the topic of the chat to asking the question, now that people are going back to work in some regard, and the additional risk of home networks, will businesses be dictating stricter policies, right? Use of corporate assets at home, or what, Mike? What are you asking about? If they're going to have force additional controls or have additional policies to?
I guess both sides of it. What can we do as users to further protect our home networks? Because we're always talking about the business networks. And second, do we see a world where businesses start dictating how we do that?
Yeah. So I think my comment first about the home network question, because this is something that it's a topic that I've been thinking about for some time, especially as the pandemic grew and the reality of teenagers gaming and doing risky behavior online while their father's upstairs trading stock, for instance, right? And for the first time probably in the history of the internet, those two activities were actually occurring on the same wire. It definitely raises the risk. I think I do not think, though, the home network is going to become a focus, because I think the focus is really, we're seeing shifting to the endpoint. And I think with 5G and with the growth of those networks, that the endpoint is going to be the king, right? The keys are going to be in that basket, and the geolocation of that endpoint, the network that it connects on, and then the authentication of who's using that endpoint is really going to be the end goal, the end result of the zero trust journey. And I think that the point of that is to make the Starbucks network, the home network, whoever you're sharing traffic with, their activity not mattering, and then also giving you the opportunity to enforce that corporate policy. That said, I mean, from in an IT industry, I think this probably goes from a different context. Your question, I think IT professionals and cyber professionals have an increased responsibility to stay vigilant about our home networks.
So I can throw a different perspective there. I appreciate your question, Mike, and personally, I just stood up full Fortinet stack in my house with APs, switches, and the firewall, and that was quite a journey. I'm happy I did it. I have full visibility into my network. I know exactly what's going on where. I have some micro-segmentation going on in my environment. I have the kids on one wireless, parents on another, all of those things. But from the perspective of your question, I think from an executive seat, the question back would be, oh, well, you have this concern. Are we seeing a trend of risk coming from those endpoints that we need to address, with ultimately funding to support more technology, whether it be hardware or software on those endpoints? And, if there's a lack of that, then I just don't see support coming in for an effort there, as well as, some of my customers are looking to, go more bring your own device, while pulling that endpoint back into their infrastructure in the cloud, Azure and AWS, Citrix, those types of things, where it doesn't matter what the endpoint is, you're managing where the data is by having it in your data center. And I think, that's where from my perspective, that's where the funding makes more sense, more bang for the buck for protecting corporate interests, and maybe even saving some money by pulling back from caring what the endpoint is, how the user's connecting or where they're connecting from. As long as I have strong authentication and can validate the user's connecting, and they have the rights they need, doesn't that support zero trust a little bit further, because you're now not trusting an additional device connecting to the environment?
Right, so you're using VDI to kind of just skip all those connections in between.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me. I don't know. I also just went through a whole overhaul of my network as well. So while I'm wrapping up that, I'm thinking, is there going to be a point where I have to do this all over again because the business is coming down and make me change how I just configured all this stuff?
Well, I appreciate your question, because when I was, installing all this stuff and configuring, I'm like, wow, this would be great if businesses could throw this out on every, all their users' environments, and, just completely segregate stuff out. You could have a VLAN for, your employee to connect from, and segregate all that other traffic, and, not care what's going on. And, you get away from being managed by Xfinity or FiOS, with their devices and their control over your ability to consume the bandwidth that you're actually paying for. I just don't see them spending the money that it would cost to really deploy that solution, unfortunately.
The weakness I see that exists that makes me nervous, having been on the attacker side a lot, is as long as you're on the same broadcast domain, as long as you're in the same VLAN, there's still a chance. There's still a good chance to get in and take over that device, or at the very least pull hashes out of it.
I think what's interesting is the reality of edge computing that we have today is a direct result of the complexity and cost of VPN management. And because there are solutions, right? I mean, and today there are very robust and simple to deploy solutions. They still require overhead to manage, that have an ongoing cost, that does not scale, right? The more deployed units you have, the higher overhead the management is, so on. So I mean, we Arraya supports and sells a lot of Meraki product, in the networking group, and that was one of Meraki's primary go-to-market capabilities, was the ability to deploy these auto VPN units, where essentially you could deploy it looks like a little USB hub or a Wi-Fi hotspot to your corporate your executives, etc., right? And it would use the cloud to auto configure, so the executive at home doesn't have to do any fancy setups. He just plugs it into his wire, and then the corporate laptop either Wi-Fi connects to that device or Ethernet connects to that device. There's 1,000 iterations of this out there. I mean, even there are carrier-based solutions. Large enterprise Fortune 500 are all using these things. But as the need shifted down into the lower market and the enterprise market and mid market, cost of VPN management and all that overhead grew, and we're like, oh, look, SSL VPNs. It's simpler. We don't have to support. It's easy. Everybody has a browser, and started opening up Edge, and then all of a sudden, data is flowing back and forth through these web portals for ease of use. Security was not really a consideration for some time. Passwords were secure, and there weren't botnets to be afraid of, right?
Well, you could also expand that topic into these personal VPNs that are out in the market now. Selling themselves as a more secure solution to protect your data online, and my cynic mind goes to, well, we're just shifting the focus of who's collecting our marketable data to now my VPN provider, because they're the ones decrypting the traffic and dropping it onto the internet at large. So we're shifting away from, they're getting in front of Google and Microsoft and all the others, Apple, that are collecting our data to use for marketing purposes, and probably defunding that whole market, or devaluing that whole market. So it's interesting to see that shift to the software, the SSL VPN.
I think it's an interesting conversation in the cyber community to talk about privacy VPNs, because if you listen to the advice we give our corporate and enterprise customers, we're not advising them to not trust their ISPs and not use, internationally, globally available DNS services. In fact, we're recommending the opposite. recommending that their traffic become recognizable, and that where they connect from and connect to should be standardized and should be predictable. And yet we think that somehow making our own personal profile online, be this ad hoc, connectivity model, it does provide privacy. It provides the people that you might be avoiding online from tracking you. That's true. But at the same time, from a financial profile or a personal profile perspective, like, that data will matter. If over time, your network patterns, your network connectivity, I mean, we are identifying people that way, and and validating who they are. And
I would ask, do those personal VPNs actually provide any privacy
all they
for
do,
you? You're just shifting the unique identifier that they're going to look for to identify you and your behavior online.
All they do is provide you a different gateway IP to get on the internet.
It protects you from the hackers in the Starbucks from grabbing your traffic off the wireless network.
Well, yeah, that's a different.
I do agree with that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yes, like public. I mean, I whether you use a privacy VPN or you just connect to your home Netgear router when you're at Starbucks, you should definitely be choosing a VPN.
Yeah. But I think that's the only reason to really use those types of services is for that protection there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you're connecting through public or say less secure ISP connections, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for that matter, you could stand up your own on, name a provider for $4 a month and move it to whatever region you want.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to set up an open VPN server.
Yeah, I mean, you can, all the Netgear products have a capability either to load firmware on them, without even hacking anything. Right? It's supported to run OpenVPN, or even, and I think the Pro model, like the Orbi Pro models, now have what they call business VPN built in, which is essentially OpenVPN. Yeah, so it's available in consumer products, absolutely. But yeah, that said, I mean, to kind of go back to the original question around, what's changing in the endpoint, is security on the endpoint changing, and what's the impact on the networks that we're connecting through, right? I mean, that's kind of the gist of what you're asking. We're seeing a shift with our customers to enforce. They learned through the events of last year to enforce some connectivity. We're looking for cloud access security program, like a conditional access, right? I'm sorry, into their O365 tenants. Restricting access from connectivity outside their own, corporate networks, to restrict or to mitigate any of the risks of their AD accounts getting enumerated and their exchange online getting hacked. So we're seeing that shift, which is interesting to me. As the shift to the cloud and O365, the need to secure that is still real, and we know that. We talk about that all the time. But one of the beautiful points of SaaS is that edge model. You have your exchange online in the cloud. You get to it from anywhere. But if you want it to be secure, you shouldn't allow access to it from anywhere, right?
Right.
And it comes back to what I think really is another topic in 22 is the orchestration and automation element of cyber, because there's all these if then else, right, or IFTT situations.
Let me ask this: you kind of sparked a thought in my head on, we preach this model of geo-blocking at the firewall for our customers all the time, and it provides a huge protection to limit, if you're a U.S. based company and you only do business in the U.S., block the rest of the world except for your known exceptions that you need to allow for business connections and customers, those types of things. Do we have the ability for those cloud services to do the same thing where we do geo-blocking? Is it easy enough to set that up as well?
At a cost, yes. And yeah, it's available at a cost. However, because of the increase of geo-blocking and that type of security control being in place, there are pretty, at this point, elementary ways to get around that.
Through your personal VPN.
Right. That's well, and not only that, I mean, that's a database that's updated and maintained. It's not it's not a geolocator, right? It's not an actual GPS dot of that IP, right? It's the reported location of the IP through a service that's then So my point is that if you're targeted, if you're a targeted organization, you can potentially circumvent some of those things. But yes, absolutely. And of course, if anybody watching this has questions about what service levels you need, definitely contact Arraya. I would not be as bold to start stating the Microsoft licensing requirements for that feature. I know it's something that at one point there's a lot of criticism for Microsoft because you had to be at a significant higher level. Almost I think double what the base user level cost would be to be able to implement that for your Azure AD. But I believe that they've tiered that out a little bit and made it a more accessible to some of their lower tier clients. But yeah, it's critical. I mean, the other thing that's changed, right, in that space is, let's be honest, the cloud providers have gotten a lot better. Their platforms are not, they've learned, Microsoft specifically, what I've seen it has done a significant job over the last 2 years of trying to get in front of the Azure threat landscape, and attack surface.
Well, I think a lot of that was customer pushback because early on, if you were an early adopter, they had these frames of security that when you really dug into it, there wasn't that much behind it compared to what you would implement locally in your own data center, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, to really continue to have the customers migrate away from their local data centers into a cloud model, they were forced almost to really beef up the service offering there to be comparable to what you would implement in your local data center.
Well, I think too the tolerance for change has shifted in the the consumer community, right? Where there was a time when if you were shifting to the cloud, the expectations of being alerted around issues or security vulnerabilities or breaches and notification versus action, a lot of those tactics and rules of the road really weren't worked out, right, with the cloud providers and their customers. Well, should they be proactive? What's the customer expectation? What's the liability? And I think that's that's one of the things that's matured is that leadership in those organizations have kind of accepted the fact that there's a level of expectation of proactive support and activity that their customers have, even if the attacks are targeted towards their customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in their environment. So I think I've seen that shift. Yeah, I had a topic to go from there. The back to the endpoint piece, it's really struck me, and I have a talk coming up that putting together the idea that we really have all our eggs in one basket now with our endpoints. We have our identities tied into them. We have what we can access through them, tied into them. In some cases, your phone is, or your laptop, or your phone and your laptop are literally the keys to your financial world and literally the keys to your corporate kingdom, right? Which is, I think, kind of touches on Mike's original question.
Right.
And I think what's interesting that a lot of times in our world, we don't really look at the latest of what's happening in criminal activity because that stuff comes out in reports. but we read that like a year later, and then we hear about things to be prepared for. But what I've kind of come to learn recently is that the criminals know this, and that there are criminal groups whose sole purpose is to compromise endpoints for the purposes of draining bank accounts, and specifically gaining access to the assets that their target has. So it's not the old hacker world of like, let's Shodan world of scanning vulnerable things, getting into the system, looking around, seeing what we can find, deciding if it's valuable and moving on or monetizing it. It's the criminal gangs are targeting whales. They're determining if they have how many assets they have, if it's worth going after them, what pieces and parts of the assets that they conceal can they sell off and monetize before they even decide how to go after the target, right? They decide if it's worth it, because that's the reality is that because they know, okay, if this person is a target to go after, chances are we just need to compromise their laptop and their phone, and we have a formula for that. They go from there. And the one that really struck me was SIM swapping and how that's shifted in the world where, we all know that, right, with two-factor authentication, SMS a lot of times is the last way to do it, right? You kind of fail back. And most people leave that on. And so that means if you can get control of someone's phone number, you can get control of their MFA capability, and that reality has been the base for lots of theft, right? I mean, but different ways, right? So I can't remember the years off the top of my head, but traditionally it was insiders working at the cell phone companies would simply just take a payoff to log in to the system, and these would be workers like in a call center or not in a necessarily a supervised, controlled environment. They had that role as a capability for their job, so they could just change. And then once by the time the end user who had their number stolen found out, the money was gone or the asset was stolen, they swap it back. But there's lots of hot potato around who's liable for that. And in fact, the courts have decided that cell phone providers are not liable for it. So the cell phone providers have done a lot to have put new strict rules in place. Now the only devices that can change can do SIM swaps are the manager devices in the corporate stores. The tablets, they have these special tokens capability, the tablet itself. So the SIM swappers have shifted their targeting methodology to go and steal the manager tablet, physically steal the manager tablet from the cell phone store. And they determine they have about a 30-minute window from when they literally run in and run out with the tablet to compromise, for instance, a Coinbase account and drain all the cryptocurrency, which is those NFTs are favored targets because you can liquidate them quickly and anonymously. And that it struck me that that control, physical device in a store held by a human under lock and key in a place that has assets of value that it would be protected and responded to by police.
But think about your fundamental controls of physical security. It's not in a secure location. Humans are taught if someone comes in and wants to steal something, give it to them. Your personal safety is worth more than any of these devices, right? So it's too easy for them to execute this process.
Yeah, no, and to that point, these criminals are typically under the age of 18, and they typically are using these funds for robo dollars.
If they're shifting the keys of the kingdom to a tablet device in a store, in a retail location, they should take on the physical security rules of a jeweler, a high-end jeweler, that the door is locked all the time, and you got to ring the bell. They look at you and say, and I guess profile you to determine whether you're a valid customer, that you're going to unlock the door for them. Right.
Well, and so, and to that point, look, there's been user education. The cell phone companies have posters up in their back rooms warning their employees of this activity. They've trained their managers about it.
But unfortunately, it doesn't. Well, it's not as effective as we would want it to be.
Yeah, but Keith, to your point, is the cost of the control more expensive than the data you're protecting from the cell phone provider?
Right, because you're going to alienate customers. They're not going to want to come to your store. I totally agree with you.
Not only is the average customer not going to want to go through a bulletproof man trap to get into a cell phone store, but they're not having to settle lawsuits with the end.
They're not liable.
SIM swapped. So there's no incentive for them to
completely agree with you, as well as changing the technology to be more secure, to get away from the inherent vulnerability of that system, is way more expensive.
And for the crypto users, I mean, the common denominator here is, or the easiest control to implement is take your money off an exchange. What are you doing? Like,
well, there's a bunch
put it on a hardware wallet.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, that's a reality. So and the moral of that story is exactly that. You have to. There's more tradecraft now. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. That, like, maybe everybody in cyber, I always say, secretly wants to be a spy. So maybe that just came out from me using the word tradecraft. But there's more offset required just for the normal day to day, just like you just went through, Keith, right? I mean, everything you just described is physical offset, right? And I think that goes.
Let me ask this real quick, because I just thought of it. So do you think that there is a simple control that the user, the human, the target, right, can do to an easy enough control that person can implement that would help protect against that? Because personally, for me, I never, ever check the box for trust this device. Because I don't want a token on either my computer or my phone that just allows me to open the app and go and access because it's got a token stored on it.
So the first thing to answer that question is get familiar with your provider. Understand specifically if you are using your cell phone number to receive SMS authentication requests, and those are connected to financial assets or other assets that are important to you. First and foremost, get familiar with the provider. If it's Verizon, AT&T, or T-Mobile, or I think that's it right now. Understand what their process is for changing a SIM, a number to a new SIM. So just if you needed to normally, and then they all have supposed additional fraud protections that you can put in place that can make it even harder. But I think first that's asking and getting familiar, because how many of us do that, right? You can put additional pin locks on your SIM to add extra level of security to it from a physical perspective, so somebody couldn't necessarily take it and put it in another phone. So there's some things that there's those types of options. Then additionally, like Mike said, if you have crypto, try to keep it off an exchange. If you have it in an exchange and you're playing those games, use different email addresses for your crypto accounts than you do for anything else, because that's one of the ways you're that you can become a target. Coinbase, I don't know if they still do this, but at one point in the very recent past, you could see if somebody had an account. Like, they would give you that. They would validate whether an email address had an account or not just by typing in the email address. So that was, so you can enumerate. Hackers would just throw email addresses in, of people they know could be a target and see if they have a Coinbase account.
Right.
At one point, Coinbase had a vulnerability where if you knew the password and the email address for someone, which we know in today's world, it's pretty easy guessable. You didn't need the SMS code. You could actually see how much somebody had in their Coinbase account. Again, making you a target. So I think the other moral of that story is the OPSEC part of it is, reduce your visibility as best you can.
So another piece there to the know your provider type conversation is, call it Coinbase, whoever, Binance, name and exchange. Once you sign up, you get prompted or whatever, you can configure MFA, but you can also configure whether or not it will fall back to SMS. And so that is, if you implement MFA and you think you're safe, all you have to do is fail the code enough times till it falls back to SMS, depending upon the provider. And you can disable that in some areas. Some areas you can't. And you have to know that's part of, is it possible to fail back to SMS once I've implemented MFA? That's something good to know of whether maybe that will adjust your risk appetite for that platform or for that provider as well.
So that being said, is SMS synonymous with a voice call as well? Because you've stolen the phone number, right? The text is going to go to that phone number. So is that the same thing?
There are voice authenticate, or there are phone call authentication options as well. Yeah, so absolutely. I think that's even used less because that can be manipulated sometimes without even a SIM swap. Incoming phone routing can be messed with. But anyway, yeah, that's possible. I mean, I know Microsoft supports that. Duo supports that as a potential.
Yeah, my bank gives it as an option for secondary authentication, text, voice.
Now, most of the time, to be fair, I have not set one of those up in a while. There was a company that Microsoft bought a long time ago called Phone Factor, and they kind of they sort of pioneered that authentication option, and the way it worked. And I think this still exists on the Microsoft side, is you get the phone call and then you have to type a PIN in. So it's not just receiving and answering; it's a known PIN, not one that you get sent, not a one-time PIN, another 4-digit PIN. So I guess it's debatable whether that's more secure or not,
depending on how the service is implemented, right?
Yeah. But I mean, look, this will shift, right? I mean, there will always be some physical element of authentication and authorization, right? That will become a target, whether it's a painting on a wall in a museum or.
Well, it's a life cycle, right? The end user needs convenience of use, or I'm not going to use it. So we loosen the controls in one direction. People that want to compromise that figure out how to work around the controls.
All right.
So we build new controls that are more restrictive. The users get fed up with it and they push back. So we loosen it up, put different controls in place that are easier to live with. But they figure out it's like just this life cycle of and the constants are that we as end users are lazy and want the easiest solution in place to not inconvenience me, to access my most secure stuff that has the biggest impact to my life should it be compromised.
You calling me lazy?
Yes,
and then,
we are humans, we are lazy.
Fair point. I take that.
We all have that friend or relative, or it's ourselves personally, that would be considered over the top from a personal security perspective, right? And typically when somebody that might be perceived that way gets challenged a little bit by maybe someone that's feeling more insecure about their own level of personal security, you find out that person has a good reason, that they've either been burglarized, or they've been a victim of some type of physical assault, or they've been the victim of a breach, or
right. I completely agree with you, and it brings to mind a conversation I had the other day. Someone asked me, with everything that's going on over in Ukraine and with Russia and all the threat of cyber attacks and stuff, is there stuff I should be doing to better protect myself? And my response was, do you feel like you need to? Because really, security is a state of mind. It's not a physical thing. It's not, how many passwords I have or authentication mechanisms I put in place. It's how do you feel at the end of the day? Are you doing enough to make yourself feel secure? Because if you're not, then do more. If you are, then you're fine. It's a state of mind. We could put up all the walls and fences and doors and passwords and iris scans and all of these things, and people are out there trying to figure out how to defeat it and get around it to access my stuff or to steal my stuff.
Yeah,
At what point do I feel secure enough?
Yeah, the best way in America to be secure, from a cyber perspective online is to have zero money. As long as you're broke or in debt and have nothing of any value, you'll be fine, right? Otherwise, you should probably take some steps to guard your assets because they're all transferable electronically. If you're not holding on to them physically, that's say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but it's true, right? As a result. So go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, I think if asked that question, which I think each of us probably gets asked that type of question at most family gatherings or that type of thing. But my counter would be, what are you doing now? Right. Because to your point, Keith, there is like the peace of mind, state of mind. I feel like I'm secure, right? But there is also just some basic stuff like, hey, how about you don't use the same password for everything? Why don't you start there? And maybe for that individual, if you care about that individual, you can let them use whatever precipitating event. Oh my God, Russia's after my retirement account, to change their behavior. This is for us. I know for me, when I talk to relatives and family and friends, I've been trying to tell them to do some basic stuff since I've known how to use a computer. So if they come to me and they say, oh my God, the Russians are coming, I'm going to say, all right, well, now here's one of all the things that I said 10 years ago. So I'll probably say reiterate some of those basics, because that is, if we look at the insurance industry going after MFA for our customers and just having some sort of secure authentication, some more secure authentication than the guy next door, they're going to go next door instead of in your place. That's the first step.
Yep. No, I agree.
Yeah. That's we've been saying this forever. You don't have to run faster than the bear, just faster than your friend.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It is you're right though, Mike. I get that asked at family gatherings, get it, sidebarred in dinner parties. And it's a challenge.
Well, it's always follow-ups after the question of, oh, well, what do you do? What do I do?
Right. And the other part of that too is that my favorite is, I do this, is that okay? Here's how I store my passwords, or here's how, is that all right? I can't, I don't know. I can't do an assessment. I don't know if you are taking pictures of where you write your passwords down and emailing them to your Russian.
See, I followed up with another question. Do you feel as though that's okay? Does that work for you?
Right.
Yeah. It's I was having dinner with a friend that I hadn't seen since before the pandemic, and I made a comment about using Hey Siri with the HomePod at home with my kids, and they said, "You're in security. How could you use that in your house?" And I paused for a minute because it's a fair question, and then I stopped and I said, "I'm not worried about that." I'm not. I'm not saying that nobody should be, but to your point, like, how do you feel? I know where that's active and where that, that speaker's listening is in part of my house that I'm not concerned about being spied on, or that I'm not having conversations that might be listened to. So,
you mean to say you're not a high value target for organizations, whether they be government or private, that are really targeting you to know what you're doing?
He doesn't feel as though he's one, Keith. That's
right. I don't feel as though I am. I mean, should we not publish this online? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't put it online. But I do know that when my 6-year-old asked Siri to turn the lights on rather than requiring me to come downstairs in the morning and turn the lights on, I prefer that.
Right. Yeah, and meanwhile, I'm on the paranoid side. I just got a new Sonos speaker that did not have the Alexa capability built in. I wanted no microphone. I don't want any of that stuff in my house. I have Siri turned off. But it's again, I don't think it's because of for me personally, I don't think it's because of the perception that I'm some super important person. It's just eliminating. I just eliminate where possible. If I don't need the service, I don't plan on using the service, then why have it in my mind that it could be listening in on something else that I don't need it there?
You personify least privilege in your life.
That's why you're not allowed over, Keith.
To that point, I'm looking at my desk here. I'm looking at a bunch of devices that have, Alexa capability or Google Assistant capability, or I guess I don't know what it's called now, Cortana capability.
Right.
And it's not activated, right? I mean, it's least privilege. That's a good point. That use the services that you use, but to that point too, you have to look, right? There's so many things that are active that are turned on. I mean, one of the ones that recently came to light was Verizon Wireless. If you're a Verizon Wireless customer, but their user agreement, like deep down in the fine print, gives them the right to track you no matter what. It's essentially, unless you this is the fun part about it. You have to install their app on your phone, which doesn't come pre-installed on your iPhone. I don't know about the Android side. You have to install that, then go like 6 panels deep in that app, and then you can disable the tracking.
Yeah, and it's got some innocuous name. It's like I'll get it wrong, so be warned. But it was called like enhanced experience or something like that.
Yes. Exactly.
So Mike, have you gone down the rabbit hole of the two-way low power radios that are built into TVs and other smart devices in your home that the manufacturers don't talk about?
Are you saying, am I disassembling and x-raying my devices to see what's going on inside them?
Are you inspecting the circuit boards on all of your electronic devices to ensure that there isn't any additional functionality built in and running?
No, but that's my level. That's my level of risk acceptance, right? I'll trust the vendors to a certain extent. I mean, I know people that go, I want open source hardware only, and then that's doubling your costs and limiting your functionality. I still want to buy a Samsung TV. I'm sorry, but I don't plug it into the network.
Yeah, I mean, I went down that rabbit hole when I first started learning about wireless security, and got some wireless signal detecting tools, and it's pretty interesting what emits signals out there, and you wouldn't expect when you first turn it on.
I'll just say this: I accept the Matrix for what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, visibility is an interesting thing with network traffic, right? And I wonder if in within our timeline, there will be some type of matrix panel to just look at traffic, right? That's flowing through, just to make sure it's not something you don't want going through, because you can, if you do have that visibility, you can see it. You can see bad traffic and good traffic is pretty detectable now.
Yeah, see, this is where I veer off into philosophy and, good and bad and, human nature.
Oh, we just need to go to UDP and mesh, right?
Yep.
Peer-to-peer.
Token
UDP.
ring. Token ring.
Yeah. That's what I'm going for.
Back to basics.
That makes me think about, so this is maybe way too in the weeds, but one of the things that I did go into was monitoring for rogue wireless networks near my house. And I know some other people that do that as well. But so if you are, for example, like collecting net flow of all of the data that's going over your gateway, that's great. You are seeing what's going in and out. But if somebody is sending it, they have a device on your network and they're sending it over an ad hoc network to something else, and it's never traversing your network, you have no insight into that. So that's another kind of, how deep do you want to go? Do you want to be notified anytime there's a new network insight? If your neighbor changes their APs, do you want an email about it?
I mean, that was one of my my favorite little pen test tools, right? Was little square shot, like coin sized box that hooked up to RJ45 port that turned it into a hotspot. And I mean, there are a lot of attacks that occur that way.
Have you looked at the Wi-Fi pineapple?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's Wi-Fi. There's adapters now. You put I have a Wi-Fi rubber ducky. It's you pop in a USB port.
Right. They now have them where they're USB-C to USB-A connectors. Yeah. There are Lightning cord adapters that are those rubber duckies. They're small Wi-Fi APs, and they present as a keyboard. So it captures all of the data traversing those.
Yeah,
those
Hack5 drops some pretty cool stuff. They take.
Yes.
I did see the iPhone or Lightning cables that they dropped. What was that, 2 or 3 years ago?
Yep.
That was like a guy's research, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll productize it for you." That was pretty. I like the community stuff. I think that Hack5 gear, more of it is used by people like us than it is.
Yes. True. But think about those cables. I mean, when I was at the really big corporate organization prior to here, you'd go into conference rooms and there's cables in every table. Yeah. And we just inherently trust this stuff. You know what? I'm now always and forever going to use my own cable when I need to plug my device in to get charged.
Or the USB condoms that you can use that only allow you to get power and no data.
Right.
All right. Well, that will conclude this one.
On that note,
on the hour. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, guys.